Hello, I'm Jake Parrott from Haus Alpenz. Today, with help from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, I'd like to talk about the whats and whys of aromatized wines. I'll be using material from the WSET Level 3 Spirit certification and taking 3 examples from the Haus Alpenz portfolio to illustrate those concepts. Have a question about aromatized wines? Please leave it in the comments and we'll be happy to help out. Have a question about the WSET's excellent suite of wine, spirits, sake, and beer certifications? Visit their website at wsetglobal.com. Here's what we'll talk about today: the long history of aromatized wines, their nomenclature and use today, and their components. Aromatized wine is literally as old as wine itself. Pretty much as soon as folks fermented grapes, they were adding other plants to the mix. The use of bitter plants in these wines is documented well before 1000 BC. After all, bitter plants were often prized for their effects on the body. The widespread use of wormwood was known in ancient Greece. Hey, with wine, honey, citrus, and wormwood, you can make a pretty decent vermouth. And like so many other things, the Romans stole the idea. Each house in proper Roman society would have their own recipe, a diversity of styles that continued until the modern era. The bitter root and flower gentian was less documented in ancient aromatized wines, but was still well known across alpine wine regions. The modern commercial history of aromatized wines begins with vermouth in the late 1700s. After the political upheavals of the mid-19th century in Europe, commercial aromatized wine styles proliferated. A newly affluent city culture wanted fashionable drinks for hanging out in cafes, with maybe just a tinge of those useful bitter plants. Later in the 19th century, the growing availability of ice and the associated expansion of cocktail culture led to much of what we still see today, the use of aromatized wines in cocktails. After a real dark age in the latter half of the 20th century, today we once again see great classic and modern examples in multiple categories. I want to take a moment here and mention a couple of special topics. The first is aromatized wine's contribution to the popular art world. The late 19th century also saw a rise in popular media, marketing, and branding, and many of the most iconic advertising images from that era were for bittersweets and aperitif wines. The other is the widespread use of the word vermouth to denote any aromatized wine. In fact, vermouth is just one category, required by EU law to contain wormwood, but it is the one in most common use in cocktails and retail. The regionalized styles of vermouth are very well developed: light and floral from Chambéry in France, robust and citric from near Torino in Italy, friendly and refreshing from Reus in southern Catalonia in Spain, and oxidative, originally from Marseille and now from Marseillan in France. But we want to be able to describe and categorize all aromatized wines. Here, the Wine and Spirits Education Trust comes to help. They propose the following 5-component framework for the composition of an aromatized wine: fortifying spirit, wine or grapes, sugar or a source of sweetness, the defining bitter note, and all the other aromatics. Today, we'll look at the specifics for each component and how they are reflected in the composition of 3 Haus Alpenz aromatized wines: 1 vermouth, 1 Americano, and 1 quinquina. Keep in mind, this is not a blind tasting grid. Rather, it's just a way for you to compare and contrast different aromatized wines. We'll start with the component that's pretty similar across all aromatized wines, the fortifying spirit. In virtually every case, the spirit is neutral, usually produced from sugar beets or surplus wine. It's still important, though. It preserves the product during production, and it is the base in which virtually all of the botanicals are infused. Producers use the spirit rather than the wine for their infusions for consistency and speed of production, but also to keep oxygen out of the base wine. And here's how we'll look at real-life information for each component by considering a vermouth, Dolin Blanc from Chambéry in France, an Americano, Cocchi Americano Bianco from Piedmont in Italy, and a quinquina, Mété Cap Corse Rouge quinquina from the French Mediterranean island of Corsica. We'll come back to those category names in a moment. Each of these aperitifs is fortified so their alcoholic strength is higher than that of normal wine. But very important, this fortification does nothing to improve the stability of these wines after opening. Keep them in the fridge and use them within a few weeks. The next component is the wine or grapes. In order to be classified as wine under EU and US tax codes, a finished product must be composed of at least 75% grapes. However, the law doesn't differentiate between dry, fully fermented wine, partially fermented fortified wine, or unfermented grape juice hit with alcohol right away, a mixture known in French as mistel. Producers' approaches diverge greatly here as to whether the wine is there just for texture and acidity or if it's a big part of the flavor. Different regional traditions often help producers decide. Here's where our three sample products start to differ. In the Chambéry style of vermouth, the botanicals are more important than the flavor of the wine, so Dolan uses Uni Blanc, a relatively neutral wine. Coqui is a winery, so it's very important to them that the grape's expression is a major part of each aperitif's flavor. For Americano Bianco, that means fragrant Moscato wine. Métis Rouge comes from a time when grapevines had just been replanted following phylloxera. Mistel was faster to make and expressed the grapes well, so like other quinquina producers, they went with Mistel. Vermentino for acid, and Muscat for fruit, both grapes well known on Corsica. Virtually all aromatized wines contain sugar to balance the bitterness, add texture, and make Mary Poppins happy. There are three main sources of sweetness: the grapes themselves, in the case of mistel-based products such as Métis Rouge; pale sugar, usually from cane or beets, which just adds sweetness and texture; and caramelized sugar, which adds a reddish-brown color, flavor, and bitterness in addition to sweetness and texture. Caramelized sugar is what makes a red vermouth red. But producers have to be careful not to use too much. As these wines are generally served very cold, too much caramel can deaden the expression of flavors. So producers use some caramelized sugar alongside pale sugar when they want that reddish color. Each of our three sample products takes a slightly different approach to sugar. The Chambéry style is for sweet products to not be that sweet, so Dolan Blanc is a good bit lower in sugar than Coqui Americano Bianco. Italian products often have higher sugar levels to appeal to the Italian sweet tooth. In Métis Rouge, the sugar of the unfermented grapes in the mistel is enough to balance the bitterness, so they don't have to add any sugar at all. The fourth element is the defining bitter botanical. As these botanicals were often the reason for commercializing the aromatized wines, the subcategories of aromatized wines are based around those botanicals. As we discussed earlier, it's only correct to use the word vermouth for wines bittered with wormwood, the leafy plant at the bottom left there. It's intensely herbaceous and can be a bit earthy. Americano is the defined term for wines bittered with a tiny bit of wormwood, but primarily gentian, the plant in the middle. Both the flower and the root give a woodsy bitterness. And quinquina, or the Italian quinato, is reserved for wines bittered with quinine, extracted from the bark of the cinchona tree. This is the same bitter compound found in tonic water. However, especially before 1919, many other bitter plants found their ways into aromatized wines. Today, the catch-all category Vino Amaro is available for those few products that remain today. Two examples of Vino Amaro from the Haus Alpenz portfolio are Cardamaro, bittered with cardoons, and Pasubio, bittered with rhubarb root and pine. Each of our example products falls into one of the three main categories. Dolan Blanc is a vermouth bittered with wormwood. Coqui Americano Bianco is an Americano bittered with gentian and a little bit of wormwood. And Métis Rouge is a quinquina bittered with quinine. The last component is a catch-all for all the other flavors added to an aromatized wine. While the vast majority of these flavors come from botanicals, you could consider the use of oak or deliberate oxidation here as a flavor factor. Most of these flavors will come from herbs, flowers, citrus, spices, or supplemental bitter botanicals. Analyzing this component is important in differentiating Chambéry vermouth, which will have more flowers and herbs, from Torino vermouth, which will have more citrus and spice. Here, each of our three example products are classic expressions of their local traditions. Dolan Blanc with local flowers and herbs and a hit of vanilla. Coqui Americano Bianco with Italian citrus and a bit of quinine, which was all the rage in 1891. And Métis Rouge with local bitter orange and a hint of walnut husk, which provides both color and a sappy bitterness. Today, we've looked at the long popular history of aromatized wines. We've seen how they reflect both the popularity of bitter botanicals over the centuries and the local tastes and traditions of their finest makers. And using the WSET standard material, we've explored how looking at the 5 essential components of any aromatized wines help us learn about, describe, and compare them. For more information on WSET, please visit wsetglobal.com. For more information on Haus Alpenz aromatized wines, visit our website at alpenz.com or follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Haus Alpenz, HAUSALPENZ. Thank you.